We all have moments in our lives which may have defined us. We may have been inspired by someone's words which were so unexpected, yet their words carried us forward in life. Or the venom of another's actions may have left deep cuts that even take us into adulthood and can trigger us. I believe our experiences act as building blocks of our personal and professional growth, shaping our perspectives, our decisions, and guiding us through the complexities of life. But we are not defined by them. We are defined by the choices we make about who we want to become and how we want to behave. In the words of Epictetus, life is not what happens to you, but how you react to it. I am really excited by my guest today. He is transforming the lives of others, and he'll tell us more about how he's doing that. But here's a little bit more about him. So, my guest today is David Ribott, an award winning executive coach and executive leadership advisor, independent non executive director, an angel investor, a social entrepreneur with a successful track record in helping C-level leaders and board directors and senior government officials transform their leadership and strategy acumen to steward business growth, cultural change, fiduciary duty across multiple industries and sectors throughout the world. He has a story to share and has truly inspired me. A big welcome to David. Thank you for being here on the You Got This podcast.
Thanks for the invitation. You had me at You Got This as a podcast name, so I'm happy to join.
Thank you so much. It's a huge pleasure for me. And we've met through a mutual connection, and we've had like some quite interesting and aligned conversations. And I really am inspired and admire the work you do and the impact you're having on the lives of others. So I really wanted you to be on this podcast. So I'm hugely grateful.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Let's go straight into this. So the work you do, the way that you help and support leaders and organizations, I believe that a lot of the stuff we do when we become adults is because maybe we were inspired when we were younger, or we had an experience around the lives that we wanted to create for ourselves. So how have your early influences impacted you to the person you are today?
Wow, you're really going in fast. Yeah. So I think the question you're really asking me is what was the impact of growing up back home in New York, growing up back in the South Bronx, what that all means. I think just to give some context for your listeners. So I grew up at a time in New York City, South Bronx, when it was at late 80s, early 90s. I was coming of age. South Bronx was known for high crime rates, drug abuse, broken homes, all that stuff. And I think when you come out of an environment like that, or that is your reality, it's easy to define yourself against what you see. And I think one of the first things I had to learn and unlearn was your starting point in life doesn't have to determine where you end up in life. And sadly, it gets more and more complex because among some of my friends, as I was coming up, and people who had the most influence on me, what was a mentor was sometimes someone who was in prison and who just took a liking to me, who had reformed. Like and that's the challenge. Some of the people I still hold in high regard have spent some time in prison, and if you were to ask them what they did, or if you asked me what they did, you probably wouldn't have time for them. But I knew them in a different context where most people in my neighborhood came out of that. And I think it was profound to see how someone could have committed a mistake or committed a crime, acknowledge that it was a mistake, and still turn their lives around. I think those are the things that get lost in those environments because you see the drug use, you see the crimes, you see, it wasn't uncommon that friends died or were killed, or I mean, there's just too many stories to name. But then I think what gets lost, in translation as well is there's a profound there's a profound beauty that does exist in these environments. So like if you ever, for example, because I'm gonna be going to the States, and I'll be going back to New York soon to visit family, so I'll be taking my son, and so obviously we'll be on the subway. And I think one of the most profound moments I can remember is one day, and it just kind of clicked for me. I'm walking to the train to then go to school. So I'm a teenager, and I just looked around, and there were just hardworking people on that train. It was just, you know, yes, most people who live in those environments come from a very specific socioeconomic background, but when you looked around and you looked at the faces of people at 6:30 a.m., 7 a.m., these are hardworking people just trying to get to wherever it is they're going. They're just trying to, at the end of the day, just trying to live an honest life and put food on the table. And I think those are the lessons and stories that don't really get talked about, because it's a small subset of people who then create a representation for what neighborhoods like this end up being or being known for. And I think that's so from an early age, I did understand polarities. Two things can be true. It's like, okay, you know, we do live in this environment, but there is a lot of honor, there's a lot of dignity, there's a lot of character. You still just got to be careful because there is a safety issue. And I think, you know, nothing is black and white. And I think from a young age, it just, without really knowing it, I understood that two things could be true. Life is less black and white, it's more gray. And you really have to understand how to navigate gray. And it's in how we navigate the gray, whether it's in our personal lives, whether it's at work. If we can do that with some skill, we're probably going to be successful.
It's fascinating that you talked about the polarity because we can go through lives with a judgment hat on, actually, and then we could see a person and label them to be a certain way, or we hear someone's story or
Yeah.
their behavior, or like what you said, that what someone may have done, even if they've reformed, like there'll be labels. You hear it in family environments, you hear it in society's environments as well. And people get labeled due to their backgrounds, as someone's been termed a delinquent,
Oh
yet
yeah.
one day you might see that that person has turned their lives
Mm.
around, that they've become successful, or they're making a positive impact because of their journeys. So, like, as human beings, like, how do we move away from those judgments that people put on us to avoid them
Oof.
becoming self-fulfilling prophecies? And I know it's a heavy question, and we're probably going in quite deep into
No,
this
no,
topic
let's
quite
go there.
quickly.
Why not?
So how do we do that? I mean, how does Monica stop judging someone because of what they've done? And then how do I, if someone judges David, how does David process that to say, actually, I'm not that label? Two questions.
So, back in the South Bronx, what used to really annoy me or really, piss me off was young people's and I define young people as just children, not of age yet, still dependent on caregivers, not having a chance to success in life. And it used to just piss me off. And it still holds true today that's fundamentally the thing and we can talk about a little bit later, but that's fundamentally the problem that I solve for. Whether it was a time when I was in education or what I do today in board and leadership advisory, I'm still solving for, you know, allowing kids access to success, and but working with the people that have the most impact on their lives. So going back to your question around, judgment is hard. And I think fundamentally, if we're able to recognize that we may be holding a bias or a judgment, I think we're in a good place. It's not ideal that, you know, we may get triggered and then outwardly othering other people, because that's actually what's happening. And it's very subtle. So, you see it in organizations all the time, is like, why do those people behave that way? Or why does finance get in the way? Or why is procurement holding up, the contracting, the contracting with the client or the subcontractor? And I think if we can just recognize what are the subtle signals that lead to ultimately judging, because by the time you get there, it's harder to pull it back, because along the way there would have been instances where there were interactions that probably inflamed the situation further. So now there's some kind of conflict or tension, and then that takes center stage, and we forget the awareness that we had, which is it was some initial judgment. I think one of the early lessons I had to learn was, you know, as I was saying before about that moment in the train and just recognizing these are just hardworking folks. Prior to that, what I needed to learn, and to your point, was while that lifestyle of living ghetto fabulous, and ghetto fabulous is just kind of living beyond your means, and having the latest Jordans, or having an outfit that probably from head to toe costs in value about $400 or $500, while not having food in the fridge and having kids in the house, or not being able to make not being able to make rent at the end of the month. Those sort of things, as I was maturing, annoyed me, and so I naturally was judging. But then I needed to reach a place where, okay, two things could be true. These are people for whom life, a way of life that we live today, is probably unattainable in their mind. uh, Access to university or university degree and being able to pay for it, and then to go to degree completion, persist, it may be unattainable. And so, for lack of better expression, it's almost like living life without control. And so, if buying a pair of sneakers that are the latest in the market brings them some joy, I can understand now why you do it. And I think it was just that moment of coming to, and the challenge is sometimes it just it happens at its own pace.
Mm.
Even if we are evolved, there's always these moments, and we all have blind spots, and it just takes more and more experiences in engaging, but also recognizing that no one's always right and no one's always wrong. And I think you know part of the question you're also asking, or actually the answer to the question, is if we are able to have or cultivate an internal GPS ethical system, we're able to kind of navigate that, because it will always alert us to maybe we're tracking in the wrong direction. And that would then maybe signal to us to ask an internal reflective question where we might be able to digest that. Absent an internal operating system that computes all that, becomes much more difficult.
Because, like even in organizations, the notion of unconscious bias, right? We know it's getting so much attention. So even leaders have it, employees have it, teammates have it. You see a person and straight away it triggers an unconscious bias. And in a way, it's the same kind of way of thinking, isn't it? It's like you're labeling a person before you know them, or you're
Mm.
making a judgment based on that bias. So if it was a leader, like what would you say to them? What could they do to understand what they're doing? Because sometimes you don't know what you're doing, you're unconscious of it.
Oh God, uh, that's an interesting question, because it's quite layered, in the sense that if I just look back in the last couple of weeks, some of the conversations I've had with leaders across different industries, you know, in coaching, there's this expression behind, let me, for your viewers, behind every complaint, there's a request. And so, if a leader is able to have access to a mentor, an advisor, or a coach who's skilled in these areas, they're able to surface it. Because, let's say, for example, if there's a bias or a rendering of a judgment unconsciously of who someone is, if that's not brought to your attention, you're likely to continue down that rabbit hole. And there's a book, Who Moved My Cheese. There's an expression in there, there's no cheese down that tunnel, so it doesn't lead anywhere fruitful. So it really is about just creating some awareness. The challenge is, no matter what industry a leader works in, there's a lot of volume, there's a lot of pace, and the ability to slow down, have a conversation, but also hear somebody. So there's a lot of skills along the way. So beyond judgment or unconscious bias, can you listen and hear what the other person's saying? Do you have the Do you have the capacity to allow feedback in? Do you have the discipline to then do something with that feedback? So there's emotional intelligence. I mean, it's just there's just so many layers to it. Um, and then ultimately, this is if a leader has access to someone who's skilled enough to then help guide them through this. If, let's say, for example, it remains within an organization, what's likely to happen is that leader is likely to then gravitate to someone who thinks like them.
Mm.
They're more likely to grab a coffee or grab a lunch, where groupthink continues to facilitate and fester and cultivate. And so what was, a small idea is now full blown theory, and then it gets applied, and there's not a lot you can do with that. And then ultimately, if leaders are behaving in this way and perpetuating modeling this type of behavior has a knockoff effect. So if we look at if you look at anything around Gallup in terms of its Q12 data or just engagement rates, or if you look at McKinsey's organizational health index, the state of the workplace is not a great place to work. And a lot of it has to do with what leaders are modeling. So whether it's not having the discipline to become more self-aware or to become better, or not to, or if leaders are struggling in just basic people skills, which is even a more broader topic, and they're also not doing anything about it, the state of the workplace, it's not an accident that we are where we are.
Mm. No, it's fascinating. And I also believe that it's the awareness to go on that journey, because sometimes that you can't force someone to make the change. There has to be a trigger to say, I want to become a better leader, or I want to better connect and inspire my people. And then that can start that journey.
And, yes, amen. And I think I often have to have the unenviable conversation with a senior sponsor. So if I'm working with a C-suite team, or I'm working with a CEO, often I'm engaging with someone on the board, maybe the chairman or the chairperson, or the most senior independent director, and we just have to speak truth. If in my observation the current CEO is not disciplined, is not managing relationships within important stakeholders, whether internal or external, doesn't have the courage to manage performance effectively and then set the tone and then cascade it down, and doesn't have line of sight on the business, they're not fit for the role. And I think I often use this quote, and it comes from Spider-Man. And I'm smiling because when I became a father, I discovered comic books. I never had a comic book as a kid. For some reason, the Batmans and I never had access to it. I had access to other things, but I never had a comic book. But when my son was little, somehow he gravitated on his own to some of these comics and stories, whether it was Star Wars or the DC stuff or the Marvel stuff. And then I dove in, and I started realizing there's a lot of great stories in here around teaching lessons, and really good for boys and sort of masculinity as well, just because it's a safe it presents it in a safe way to digest it. And so in the Spider-Man comics, part of Spider-Man's origin story is when his uncle dies.
Mm.
And so with great power comes great responsibility. And I start a lot of conversations off with that. It's like, if you want the power, it comes with the responsibility. You can't have one without the other. And if you're power hungry and you lack the due diligence to be responsible, your people are going to see it. Like, there's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to hide if you're neglecting the second part of that requirement to be successful. You can't just be interested in the salary of what it means to rerunning enterprise. You have to also step into, which is why the role is so hard, because I think I gave a 2-day workshop a few weeks ago in Abu Dhabi for a client, for a private sector client, and the CEO was able to attend, and it was quite nice because it just it showed a lot of support for what was happening over those 2 days. And I just thought at that level of leadership within the organization, to be able to have the CEO in such an intimate environment, even for 30 minutes, was, that's an experience. And he was really open and candid. And I took the opportunity to just ask a question. I said, you've been in the role 2 years. What would you tell, and so it's 2020, it's 2024. What would you tell your 2022 self about the role before taking the role? And his exact words were, don't take the job. And I think therein lies a lot of honesty, because the ambition to ascend to, more senior roles, do it with both eyes wide open. Don't do it with blinders. And every role gets progressively more difficult the higher up you go. And if, let's say, you're within a matrix management environment, it's a vertical within a wider group, it's only going to get more and more complicated. So know what you're stepping into, know what you're saying yes to, and then be conscious about what you're saying yes to. Because there's a point at which if you don't have skin in the game, you're going to fall apart. You're going to fall apart, because if the reasons why we ascend are to have the title, to have the business card that says, chief executive officer, the corner office, the fancy parking spot, when shit hits the fan and the board is coming after you, you're not meeting your numbers, and you need to course correct strategy, but you've been neglecting, there's no amount of money that is going to help you pick your head up. So you have to have the right mindset to be able to navigate this. So essentially, you have to want the pressure. You have to believe that I can do this job better than other people, and through hell or high water, I'm going to see this through, and I'm going to bring you with me on my back. And if you follow me, we'll be success. Like, you've really got to step into that. And if you're not, it's going to show. Like, it's going to show. And you can BS your way as much as you want, but I've been around the block long enough, and inside of 30 minutes, I can just tell you, listen, this isn't going to work. And I think the blessing of what we were just talking about in New York, growing up in that way, is just don't take any shit. I coupled with the compassion and understanding for that role is difficult. So I have an immense amount of respect for people who step up. That they're successful or not, gotta give them credit for stepping into the dance floor and saying, you know what, I'm gonna give it a go in good faith. I'll take those punches, and let's see how it works out. But I'm not gonna give up. Now, whether or not they're successful, that's different. But if they go in good faith, skin in the game, gotta respect that. Gotta respect that, because that is a hard thing to say yes to.
Powerful. One of my favorite quotes from Marvel as well. So was it Marvel?
Yeah, it is. It's Marvel as Spider-Man.
When before we started today's podcast, we were talking about sport, because sports played a big role in your life. Like, what is it about sport that you're attracted to?
I wonder. I was asked once if the impact of sports on me. And I when I was asked that question, I went to, if I didn't have football, because when we talk about sports, we're really talking about America, depending on who your audience is. When I say football, I mean American football. So when we're talking about sports, we're talking about what American football did for me. And by that, what I mean is, I've played organized football since the age of 12. And then I also, by the time I was done, I played semi-pro. And so I played at a competitive level. And I think if there was no football in my life at that time, at the age, because I played at 12, but I had started searching. Because it's interesting, because I just got frustrated. I wanted to play football all the time, but none of my friends were around, or we couldn't get enough people to play a 3-on-3, and it's just like, man, I just want to play ball. And so I started looking around, and I remember there was a guy around, around my neighborhood who used to come every now and again with equipment, and you can tell he was playing. I just asked him. So he pointed me in a direction. I think if there was no football, there's no football, my the trajectory is very different. There's no football, there's no roadmap for what discipline looks like, because it anchored what discipline looks like. It's you I went into football just wanting to play, but you have practice, and practice is hard, and you have practice 3 days a week, and then you have games on Friday nights or Saturday, and it's so it took a lot of time. And then not only are you practicing, but then you also got to take the playbook home, and then you're watching game tapes, and you're coming back between practice, and you're working on mistakes that you made, and you're trying to rectify them. That's a lot of work. But I don't if I don't have that early, and then also with the discipline of coaches on top of you and teammates, and then also visually, like, you can see yourself getting better, and you can see the team winning, and so you can start to make these neural connections between, okay, you do this, it opens this up, so there's a pathway to success. So it's like, oh, that's what that is. And I think without football, I don't know that, at least at around that age. It doesn't necessarily mean that I don't arrive there or that we're not here today, but the truth is I don't know, because if I don't have football, then I'm probably on the street with my friends. Football, we had practice 3 days a week after school, which meant for those 3 days I wasn't on the street with my friends. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean I was trying to get into trouble, but if you're on the street, trouble finds you. So it kept me off the street. It kept me disciplined. It just showed me what success looked, and I just had a taste of it. And I think we can't underscore what that means, because if I look at my son's 9 years old, so his reference for what's possible is just completely different than what mine was. And I think he has a sense of what success looks like, because he has a different architecture that supports it between myself and his mother, and I didn't have those elements. And so to be able to feel the joy of putting in some time and work and trusting a process, and then ultimately, because we were also successful, like we won a lot. So I think that's the other thing too. It wasn't just that I played, but that we were good coaches. We had a good system, but we won. I mean, I think we won 5 titles in my entire career, and that sense that sense of fulfillment can't be understated, because if I don't have that, there's where do I get that self-esteem and self-confidence from? And I don't know, because I didn't go to the greatest schools. I mean, I went to pretty bad public schools. I think by the time I graduated from elementary school, I remember reading in the newspaper, and I don't know why I was looking at a newspaper, but I had heard about the story, so I just looked at it. The school principal of my elementary school, had been arrested for buying crack at a crack house around the corner. And then my middle school, what we call junior high school, middle school, same. My middle school principal was fired for having hired a teacher who had molested a child previously, and then was accused of it. So, like, I didn't have the architecture to ensure or to predict that I would come out on the straight and narrow. Like, all the conditions to go sideways was there. So if I don't experience organized sports with coaches who who are willing to donate, because these were coaches that didn't get paid, at least at the youth level. They were donating their time to spend time around young men. And it wasn't just football. You start having conversations around, because I was in high school. I remember one day my coach asked me a question about, what is I was going to study at school, at university. And I remember the framing of the question didn't allow me to think about whether or not I was going to go to university. And so it would be hard to quantify, but all roads, everything connects through that and the experiences and just seeing that there was another way. And I think if you don't know there's another way of doing things, then you just don't know what's possible.
Mm. Yeah, like sometimes you can reflect, what if I hadn't done this, or what if I had done this, where would my life have been? So that's really that's really powerful what you've shared. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing those experiences and insights. Like, you talked a lot about discipline, and for me, discipline is about mindset. It's
Mm.
about resilience as well. So how important, and given the fact that you're a coach as well, like, how important is mindset for us to get through life?
Highly important. Without mindset, what decisions are we taking? Without mindset, what's the lens through which we're looking at ourselves? What's the lens we're looking at other people? With mindset, mindset is part of the operating system. And if you're not consciously building an operating system, then it's going to accidentally build itself. I'll make the connection in organization. In organizations, when you're looking at organizational culture, I don't know who said it first because so many people have said it since, but there's a saying, what you permit is what you promote. Same holds true for the individual. If you're not consciously going about a deliberate, intentional way of being, then things will accidentally emerge, foster and fossilize. And then that becomes your operating system. And so, what do you want to onboard? And if you're not committing to your mindset, then what are you saying yes and no to, really?
So it's key for us in terms of how we want to go on with our lives, basically.
Indeed, indeed. I mean, when I talk with leaders, I mean, no matter where they rank in the organization, because whether you're a mid-level leader or frontline supervisor, if you're people managing, it's hard. Like, you're people managing is hard, and it's the most difficult thing to do. And I think when you look at what's difficult in an organization, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, publicly listed, or a government institution, we still haven't yet gotten right the relationship between direct report and line manager. And if we can get that right, then we might have a chance. But that's really the first principles approach to problem solving at that level when you're talking about a toxic environment and what have you. Because I come out of sports, I often talk to leaders and I say, listen, in order for you to do well, in order for you to perform at an elite level, you need to treat yourself as a corporate athlete, which means, how are you preparing for work? It doesn't mean you need to work on the weekends. It doesn't mean you need to take work home, but what are your supplements like? What is your sleep like? How much are you eating in? How much are you eating out? How are you preparing yourself for the rigors of the work? Because there's a parallel there. If you're not preparing for work, then you're also not preparing for life, which then means you're not doing your work. And if you really, really want to be successful, there is no getting around doing our work. Like, it just is what it is. And I think from a mindset perspective, and kind of coming back to, I think maybe what gets in the way of mindset, and is fear. And fear of a lot of things, fear of success, because that also is a fear. Fear of failure is a real fear. And sometimes, if we haven't had those early experiences of stepping outside our comfort zone, even within a supported environment, then we don't know what we don't know. And as we continue to grow and evolve as adults, if you're not consciously pushing yourself in areas where you can step outside of that and seek the support of people who have your best interests at heart, it's going to be hard to really do your work and excel. And I'm just using basic terms here, because you can't want something without doing something to get there. Like, no one owes us anything. I mean, I think, yeah, as children, no matter where you live, I think the right to basic healthcare, basic education, that your caregivers take care of you, those are basic rights and needs. I think as we cross into adulthood and later in life, like, no one owes us anything outside of respecting our humanity. But that's also two ways. That goes two ways. And I think if we could at least start with no one owes us anything. Life isn't about entitlements. We're in a better place to really compete with the rigors of and just navigate, because there's so much coming that can't be that can't be forecasted, that if you're not prepped for it, it's going to knock you down. I mean, I remember, I think we were prepping for this podcast, that I've survived two car accidents. And in the last car accident, which was, I think today, what year are we in? 2024? My God. In 2008, I was in a really bad car accident. And part of the reason why I was able to recover well was because I was in shape. I was in shape, I was disciplined, and I just understood that things take time. And so while I still got frustrated and I wasn't always at my best, I understood that this was just part of the process of healing. And I think we just, we can't get there unless we accept that there is rigor, and if that rigor requires us to be at our best. And our best doesn't need to be the best in comparison to someone else. It just has to be our own best. And our best can look different day to day. I mean, my best today is probably a 60 compared to the rest of the week, because I've been flat. As I was saying before, it's been a busy few weeks. 3 days ago, my best looked different. But I think as long as we can have some compassion for ourselves, that we've done our best. And this is it. Like, not only it's not only the discipline to persist, but it's also the discipline in some key areas. And often you might find how we can just trigger ourselves, and that piece there about having compassion. As a recovering, and I'll admit this, as a recovering high performer, I had to really be easy on myself. I had to learn how to be easy on myself. And so with that, then also comes, we never stop learning. And that's also part of the process, that we commit to, that this is a lifelong journey, whether it's at work or whether it's in our personal lives. It just never stops. And we just have to commit to, and that's okay. Because then, what's the alternative? If we stop growing, or we stop being conscious about deliberately working toward or manifesting something that's important, like, what then shows up in its place? That's not a reality I'm comfortable with.
Yeah, it's so powerful. You talked about, like, you're not feeling you're optimal, and in the book, the 4 agreements, it's always one of the agreements is always do your best. So
Yeah.
if you're not having the best
I
day,
love
do the
his work,
best
yeah.
day that you do, the best of yourself that you can on that day. If you're low energy, that could be the 60 or that could be the 50, but whatever, do the best that you can. So that was really powerful. And we've spoken a lot about doing the work, that the reality of your life, how you want it to be. You want to almost go on that journey that you define. And today you're coaching people, you're helping them get to where they want to get to. So this whole notion of personal development, self-growth, like, how important is that for us as human beings?
Oof. Well, it's a matter of survival. And then if we can get past surviving, then we can start to thrive. And I think I position it that way because I think there'll be moments where we need to survive. And then once we lay down that foundation, we're on steady ground, and we can start to build, and we can start to win and thrive in life. And as human beings, without having purpose, it becomes very difficult to exist. I'm sensitive to men's issues. When you look at suicide globally, men are more at risk of dying by suicide for a whole host of reasons. And when you start to pull back a little bit, one is it's your connections to your community. How deep are those relationships? The outlets from which to express yourself, but also having the capacity to express yourself. before you can get there, you have to work on expressing yourself. And so there's all these different steps along the way. Um, Self development. I mean, you just get with self development, you're able to figure out what your purpose is in life. And when you're able to figure out what your purpose is in life, you can start to go in a direction. The moment you have a direction in life, the world changes. You know, whether you're an individual or you're a couple and you're about to get married or you are married, when you're tracking in the same direction, if you're a family, like that's a beautiful place to be because there's purpose, there's a sense of belonging, there's a sense of, you know, arm to arm, you're going in the same direction on purpose. You know, conversely, in organizations, if that could also happen, that sense of belonging, that sense of camaraderie, that sense of, you know, we're all in this together, something profound can happen. And I think, you know, what I do, you know, when I'm working with someone, I just kind of share, you know, the problem that I solve for, because oftentimes I meet people who are new to doing their work, and you know, it only helps if I just model for them what that looks like. And I remember, and this happens all the time, and so I can work with whether it's a man or a woman. Often, the ones that are most resistant have stronger masculine qualities. I'm just going to call them masculine qualities, because I've worked with a lot of women who also, at a very senior level, in order to survive, have adopted a lot of those masculine traits, rightly or wrongly. And I'm not here to judge, because there are moments and times where those points will serve. It's just knowing when to be adaptable enough and have enough range to bring in both masculine and feminine qualities, whether it's the feminine quality of being empathetic or being able to open up and listen, or you know, demonstrate vulnerability, or to, you know, some of the masculine qualities of taking the best decision possible within a limited range of information. You need both. It's just knowing how to jump between the two. So no matter how fiercely masculine the qualities are, every time I share what my purpose is, the problem that I solve for, everyone melts because they get it. Everyone has something that connects them to themselves much more deeply. Sometimes some of us have more access to it or can easily access it, and some of us, it's almost like breaking through the cement floor with a pile driver because that's how far removed we are from it. And I'll share it now. You know, going back to the way that I grew up, it pissed me off. It just pissed me off, the sense of learned helplessness. And but I also get it. You know, if you're in a tough situation, there's no hope for a better outcome. It only naturally happens. And if you don't have people around you who are also rooting for you to pull you out of it, we can slide into that. And so I remember, with compassion, learned helplessness was a thing that I knew I couldn't live with. And very specifically, the impact of learned helplessness in adults on young people. Because I was surrounded by people who had just kind of given up on life. And I just remember seeing my friends who were connected to some of these people, even myself and family members. Like, it just changes your outlook. The conversations you have with people who are in that state, you're not dreaming big, you're not thinking big. And so when I was still studying to do my bachelor's, in the mid '90s, there was a school of thought that, you know, quantity versus quality of time parents spend with their children, or caregivers with the children. And so what we discovered around the time I was finishing uni was, it wasn't the quantity of time, it was the quality. And so, very specifically, let's say the caregiver is home having dinner with the kids. They come home from a stressful day at work. If they came home tired, but still excited about work, and still excited about work, still found purpose and meaning, the children at the dinner table were profoundly impacted in terms of their ability to see what resilience looks like, to start to understand that two things can be true, polarities, and just better outcomes in life. Like, we can track that. Now, conversely, if that same caregiver came home from work, prepared dinner, those same children were observing this caregiver to be in a state of a state of you know being despondent, those children were more likely to start to internalize real complex emotions around learned helplessness. Um, and if they don't have outlets, they're likely to continue to internalize them. So they're more likely in that environment to act up in school, demonstrate deviant behavior, more likely to get pregnant, more likely to get a girl pregnant, experiment with alcohol and drugs earlier, more likely to end up incarcerated. And so I learned early on that that was a thing for me. That if, and for some people, it's ending world hunger. It's there's amazing people where I live in Abu Dhabi who feed stray cats. Like there's something for everybody. And I think once you figure out what that is, life changes because you have meaning and you have a reason to get up in the morning. Because to get up in the morning is not always easy. It's hard when you're tired. It's hard when you're about to navigate a day where you've got 10 meetings back to back and you know they're all going to be difficult and they're going to be difficult for different reasons. If you don't have something that helps you get out of bed, you're more likely to call out sick. And so when we look at the rates of absenteeism at work, or there's a reason why. And so, being able to just connect to what's important for you and then taking that and allowing that to be the thing that guides you moving forward is immense. Without direction, I mean, we're literally we're lost.
Having that purpose and meaning is
Mm.
so important.
And we can't do that without self-development.
Correct. Powerful. You're an ICF master coach, right? One of the top accolades of being an ICF coach. So I'm quite proud and honored to have you here, like having an MCC, which is what a master coach is known as. What makes the coaching profession so important to you?
Ah, so coaching is part of the helping professions, and I think it aligns with me personally with again my purpose in life and the problem that I solve for. And I think it's meaningful work, whether, and there's lots of ways we can show up in the helping profession, but I think very specifically, if you're just looking at coaching, whether it's team coaching, whether it's organizational coaching, whether it's one-to-one coaching, in those assignments, you're working with people who are vulnerable. Now, it doesn't mean that they're incapable. I'm not saying that at all. A lot of times they're very, very capable, which is why they've reached the stage of success that they have, which allows them access to coaching as a form of leadership development, capacity building for them within their organizations. But when you look at sorry, when you look at the context of what it means to be a leader, if you're a CEO, you have no peers. You have no peers. You literally have no peers. If you're in the C-suite, you have some peers, but then it depends on whether or not you get along with them, because at the C-suite level, everyone's cross-functional. So it just depends. But if you're a CEO or you're the head of a business, you don't generally have peers, which then means where do you go to talk things out? Because we're all human. So we have doubts, we have questions. Where can you go to feel safe enough to then open up in a way that allows you to work through things? You know, that's what coaching offers for leaders, whether it's within the one-to-one context or if it's in the team context. I have a background in mediation, and so often if I'm working in a team context, whether it's team coaching or I'm doing a leadership offsites, a lot of times I'm just helping them at a very basic level understand how to overcome conflict and just making sense of conflict. And one of the challenges is if we lean towards not rocking the boat, or we lean towards harmony, which isn't a bad thing, but it also it shortens the lens of what's possible because in a team environment and organizational context, there's a dance. And I think I recently heard Esther Perel, you know, if you're familiar, she's a famous a marriage psychologist, and she's done decades and decades of work with couples and great research. She describes the rhythm of a relationship being states of calm, states of chaos, and states of repair. And so that's there's a three-step dance there. If you're a leader in an organization, there's also an ebb and a flow. But if you're immersed into the day to day, often, and we talk about leaders needing to be strategic, but the truth is, when you're inside there, you almost need a lifeline because you're sinking, you're just above water, and you're getting tired, and there's no island for you to kind of dock. Like you're at water, at sea by yourself. It's just exhausting.
Mm.
And so we're not always at our best. The ability to work with someone who's trained to help you navigate that, who also may have executive management experience as well, can kind of sidebar with you. And this is where it could be a little bit of mentoring or advising or coaching. So it just depends on the hat you're wearing. It's invaluable. It's invaluable because for many people, they may not have strong enough relationships at work where they may not even have one friend whom they can trust and open up to, which then means, I'll use the analogy of kind of hostile territory. If you don't have someone you can trust at work, and we spend most of our life at work, that is a daunting existence. And so if that is true, it's more likely that your nervous system is going to be activated all day. Now, if your nervous system is activated all day, God help you, because the best version of you is never going to show itself. It will be the best of what's possible in that moment. If you look at, like, for example, if you look at cops, there was a famous study, I forget where it came from, but I have a lot of friends back home who are cops. I was always interested in kind of the mindset. Police officers, no matter where you are in the world, 90 plus percent of what they see is about 5% of really the human, what typical human behavior is. But that's 90% of what they interact with. If you take that into an organizational context, leaders or even employees, because there is no difference whether you lead a team or whether you're an independent contributor. If you're in an environment where 90% of what you experience is probably the most difficult 5% of what life has to offer, you're going to be in a state of nervous activation for most of the day. And if you're at an organization where typically it would be referenced as a toxic culture, and you're a caregiver, you have children, or you're caring for older parents, it's like, what options do you, so you can feel boxed in. And if you had access to someone who was in your corner, because that's the other thing too. So when you're looking at a coach, the conversations are confidential, but they're also on your side. And there for the coach, they need to manage the relationship with the organization, also with whom they're working with as a coachee, but they're generally on your side. And so they're operating in good faith. If you had that within the context I just described, it transforms lives. And so when you look at some of the data that comes out of, whether it's the ICF or, EMCC or places that are doing research on this, often coaching is a synonym for transformation. And this is some of the reasons why, because it has a profound impact. But at the end of the day, what we're really looking at is it's a human approach to development. So when you strip away everything, it's just bringing back humanity to the workspace and showing the person you're working with how to slow down, how to make sense of it's almost like in the Matrix. Yeah, there's that point where Neo moves up and then the scene kind of slows down. When you're able to slow down, there's a way of recapturing the lens through which we start to observe reality. And when you can get there, you're able then to cascade that down to your own people. And this is where, when you're looking at organizational transformation, coaching is part of the wider transformation framework because it does have impact. It does work. It may be one of the elements, but it has impact.
You're powerful. And just having that 1 hour on a weekly basis or every fortnight to speak to someone and express and share and
Mm,
soundboard ideas, that's so powerful. And that's the impact that a coach makes, to their clients. So I think it's a game changer. I never believed in coaching in the way that I do today. And that's because after I became a coach and
mm.
went through that transformation, I really understood what it means. Um, so our listeners out there are probably, I'm sure they're inspired by what you've shared today. Like, what tips would you want to share with them for them to move from striving to thriving, to live the lives that they really want to live?
I would first say take a deep dive and figure out who you are. What do you represent? What do you stand for? Because if you can start to answer those, if you can start to ask those questions, you can start to answer those questions. And that might help guide what's important for you, which then can open up. Are you in the right role? Are you working in the right industry? Or do you aspire for something else? Like, you got to take an internal audit first. And then once you take that internal audit, surround yourself with people who have skin in the game for your success. I mean, I often tell people, who are your 3 a.m. people? And 3 a.m. people as a context is, if you're going through some kind of crisis in life, it's 3 a.m. We're in Dubai today, but as expats, we're connected to people all over the world. We have family at home. You're not thinking about the time. It's just 3 a.m. here. Who would you call? And that person or the people you would call means that those are the first people you think of, which means you know that they have your back, which then also means when you call them, whether or not they're ahead of us, in terms of time zones or behind us, they're going to take your call equally, understanding that if you're calling at that time, it must be something important. So in addition to taking an internal audit, seeing where we are, who we want to be, you got to surround yourself with people who've got skin in the game with what you want in life. And conversely, you want to be investing in people too. So relationships matter. Having the right community of people, or dare I say, your own personal board of directors, is helpful. Whether you enroll friends or you enroll mentors, but enroll people that matter that can help you to get to where you want to be. But you got to be conscious about it. You got to be deliberate. I mean, there's and again, it goes back to the work. Like I was just gonna say something about deliberate practice. There's a the the there's a leading expert in the field of elite performance. His name is Anders Ericsson. He's a professor at the University of Miami in the U.S. And he coined the phrase deliberate practice. If we're not deliberately practicing the thing, we're never gonna get better. And I think there's something profound about just chunking it. Like, if you can just take micro steps towards that, you're more likely to get there. I think what creates the overwhelm is when you look at, as they say in How to Eat an Elephant. It's like when you look at an elephant, it's overwhelming, but one bite at a time and you can get there. Deliberate practice can sound overwhelming, but in fact, it's just chunking into micro steps what it means to get there. And I think start with yourself, look at your community, enroll people that can help you get there, but people who are invested in you. Because people who are not invested, you won't be there at 3 a.m.
Well, thank you for that. I'm sure our listeners found that very useful and valuable. So, David, tell us how we can learn more about you, get in touch with you.
Just connect with me on LinkedIn. You can visit my website. You can invite me out for coffee. You'd be surprised how often I actually have. I actually allot a couple of hours in a week to just interesting conversations with people that I might just be meeting for the first time through social media. It's often virtual because I think that's an easier way to kind of make the best use of my time within that kind of meeting. I'm quite accessible in that way. Um, I'm also in the process of writing a book, so be on the lookout for that. That might be interesting as well for your listeners.
That sounds really interesting. What kind of themes are you covering in your book?
So over the years, I've been in business now 10 years, and over the years, I started to see patterns and why clients were coming to me, and I started to notice there were three very specific reasons as clusters that were problems that we were solving for. And from that, I developed this framework from which is kind of just a blueprint for how to do the work at an organization. It's a very basic approach to how do you onboard an operating system, then how do you operationalize, and then how do you upgrade it, and then also just pointing to the three most common reasons clients come to me, and they use different language, but when I zoom out and just kind of look at it in aggregate, we're working on a misalignment of purpose, a misalignment of performance, and a misalignment of prosperity. Misalignment of purpose is when the workforce is no longer feeling like the company is aligned to its mission, and that creates some rupture. It creates some distrust, and when you're at that place, people disengage. Misalignment of performance has more to do with just starting to recognize that not all people are held accountable in the same way. Or if you look at a performance rating 5 or performance rating 3, you just wonder, how did that person do that when they've actually got nothing tangible, on the books for what they achieved in the year versus this person who's gotten a 3. And so when you start to see this inconsistency around performance or people being held accountable and others being held accountable maybe too much, it creates a misalignment of performance. And then when you dig in deeper, you're looking at, are line managers conflict avoidant? Do they have the skill set to be able to hold accountability? Do they have the skill set to be able to model good leadership? And then it comes down to, what is the quality of that relationship? And then the last thing that I noticed over the years was there was a misalignment of prosperity. And so gone are the days of working for one organization, retiring after 20 or 30 years of service and getting the gold watch. So today we're much more transient. Um, if you just look at the what sector was it recently? Was it professional services? And then also the tech sector. There's been massive layoffs
Mhm.
and due to restructuring in professional services within the big four. And so if we know, or if there's a pattern of when times get tough, there's a workforce reduction, then what happens is, well, what's the social contract?
Mm.
What are we agreeing to? So then as an organization, the relationship between employer and employee, how do we meet in the middle? Because I'm desirable in the marketplace. Conversely, what's the skin in the game that an organization has for its employees? What's your employee value proposition? I can't tell you the number of times I've sat down with leaders who said, why can't they just get on with it? Now, in their defense, I get it. It was said from a place of frustration and not the most skillful moment. So we forgive them. But there's something telling about that as the default setting, meaning there's a gap in understanding and crossing the bridge between employer and employee. And if we don't solve for that, there's always going to be an issue or misalignment of prosperity. Because what's the social contract? Because if we've broken the agreement of modeling or achieving our purpose and mission, because that's broken, and performance there's a misalignment there because not everyone is getting line managed or performance managed fairly. By the time you get here, it's done.
Mm.
Like there is no there's nothing left in the relationship. And so what are we focusing on that's going to create prosperity on two sides? Because it has to be mutually beneficial.
Mm.
Otherwise, then we're looking at employees as cogs in the wheel, and they're gonna know that, or they're gonna sense that, or at the very least, they're gonna experience that, and that'll be the lens through which they make decisions. And from a business continuity perspective, if turnover is too high, your competitive edge in the marketplace is going to get hit.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like such a fascinating, relevant book. So please keep us informed and updated so we
Fingers
can
crossed, we're
share it.
looking at hopefully before the end of the year, if not Q1 next year.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm sure we're all really looking forward to that. Thank you for joining today's You Got This podcast, David. It's been a huge honor to have you here. And the topics we talked about, the themes we've covered are really profound and powerful. And I'm hugely grateful for you sharing your experiences and trusting me with this conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for the invitation. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.